please do not adjust your set. The problem is in your head. Greetings, prisoners of gravity. This is Commander Rick, interrupting your signal. I think we have to talk, or okay, I have to talk. I was watching Star Trek reruns for the zillionth time, and I noticed the cast was multiracial, multinational, even multi-species. But it's all so American. Try imagining a Canadian Star Trek. Space Aid, the final frontier. These are the adventures of the Starship Compromise, whose 5-year royal commission to seek out and discover les nouveaux mondes étranges. Live long and prosper. Phasers on Hanoi. Government-subsidized sickbay. Or instead of a shuttle, a Zamboni. All hailing frequencies open, but I'm only getting CBC. And I just lost that, Captain. And the security guys in the red uniforms? Mounties! Captain, sensors indicate planet is a frozen ball of ice, perfect for human habitation. Ship's log, stardate 35849, 9.5 in Newfoundland. You see, I mean, I don't know. I always thought science fiction and comics were international art forms, and now I'm not so sure. Hit it, Nancy.
Rising anti-Semitism in Eastern Europe has voted English only sign. 40,000 tons of armed with PCBs blew up the ozone layer today.
Standing by for solid rocket booster separation.
Science fiction and comics are American, right? Captain America. It sounds right, doesn't it? Captain France or Captain New Zealand sounds silly. And what other country would offer kids a hero like Richie Rich or Uncle Scrooge? And in science fiction, when aliens invade, they always land in Washington, D.C. or out in the Nevada desert. They even speak like Americans. And the movie Planet of the Apes, based on a French novel, what does Charlton Heston find buried in the sand? The Statue of Liberty. And yet, the roots of science fiction lie in England.
A lot of the classic science fiction works are British, but they haven't been labeled as such. All the way back to the first, what I would call the first science fiction writer, Mary Shelley with Frankenstein. It was not set into a different categorization. It was not marketed as a science fiction novel. And the same was true of 1984, and the same was true of Brave New World. They were just, and the same is true even of A Clockwork Orange later. They were all considered just other novels in the British mainstream publishing. Over here, we went a different path. Because science fiction started as a pulp literature with Hugo Gernsback and his first science fiction magazine there, we came from a less polished literary tradition.
Science fiction writing started in pulp magazines, paid by the word, and basically it was churned out to fill a market need. As a result, it was extremely formulaic. Again, as so often in discussions like this, we can refer to the idea of the white male engineer landing on the planet and making it safe for humanity over and over and over and over again. What has happened in the US recently is that SF has gone through 3 processes. The first we might call a renaissance, except there was no naissance in the beginning. Let's say a refinement of literary technique. Second is that science fiction became very trendy for a while. So quite a lot of mainstream writers began to dabble in science fiction, and they gave it a certain kind of cachet. And third, I think writers who were born after the pulps and who never experienced the pulp reality have started treating science fiction in a different way. And I think readers who never saw a pulp magazine except perhaps in a museum are treating it a new way as well.
The United States is not great at the traditional forms. The standard literary world, you know, the big sort of 19th century style novel and so forth, that's not what we're really good at. What America really means to the world is its invention of genres. We've invented so much in this century: the detective novel, the hard-boiled detective novel, the Broadway musical,
The soap opera, roller derby, wrestling.
Modern science fiction, the Western.
Western, sure.
Lots of things that we invented, found whole, and are identified with us. Those are our real strength. And I think a couple of centuries looking back, people will say, here's what they actually did well.
And yet today, there's a lot of great science fiction being written all over the world.
There is much science fiction written in Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, Japan, South America, but it hasn't gained a large worldwide audience yet, in part because modern science fiction, with its attitude that the Americans introduced, that the future should be seen through the techniques of realism. It's a real place to enlist the devices of realism in the cause of the fantastic. That method, which the Americans invented, principally Robert A. Heinlein, has become so wildly successful that it's tended to swamp other countries. And so most people in other countries regard the true science fiction as being American. In the same way, I think that in a lot of other countries, people regard the real central movies as being made by Americans.
Thanks, Gregory. Well, most Americans regard the central movies as coming from the US, but then the Japanese keep buying all the Hollywood studios up. And the world's largest producer of movies is actually India. Didn't know that, see? Jim Bain is editor-in-chief of his own company, and Bain Books has published writers from the United States, from Canada, and Europe. Jim, it's Rick. Is there still an American voice in science fiction?
Well, I think that in its most attractive and seductive garb, it is an optimistic, almost expansionist, and human affirmative form of fiction. And certainly in the 50s and 60s, when the United States alone and Canada had been spared the aftermath of World War II, and really were spared World War II in any serious sense. We were the only success story in town, and thus were quite optimistic in a general way, and were also quite fond of ourselves.
And did the Vietnam fiasco temper that optimism?
Oh, it knocked the heck out of us. It was America's single worst experience. We were not, in my opinion, but we were, as a country, convinced for a while that somehow or other it had happened that, against all of our inclinations and our own self-image, we had become the bad guys. And, of course, there was an internal sense of betrayal and an absolute loss of self-confidence, because we still very much wanted to be the good guys of the world for the world.
The problem is that America's definition of a good guy is the one who shoots faster. America, where a trusted friend's a real straight shooter, and smart people are quick on the draw, and someone who's fun to be with is a real pistol. The lesson of Vietnam was that shooting faster doesn't make you the good guy, not, that anyone seems to have learned the lesson. Jim, how did America's experience in Vietnam translate into science fiction?
Oh, a lot of stories about optimistic, affirmative, can-do, pro-technological individuals getting kicked square in the teeth, for one thing. America takes it on the chin, or wherever.
Well, that's what happens when you keep getting into fights. Eventually, you're going to take one on the chin. Thanks, Jim. When Vietnam veterans began writing science fiction, they brought a dark, cynical view of war. No kidding. Compare two novels. Robert Heinlein's 1959 gung-ho novel, Starship Troopers. A father and son join an elite interplanetary Marine Corps. The family that blitzkriegs together stays together. Compare that with Vietnam veteran Joe Haldeman's 1974 novel, The Forever War. It's about a 2,000-year war between humans and aliens. Heinlein and Haldeman's views of war are as different as the movies The Green Berets and Full Metal Jacket. But these days, is it just me? The guys with the guns are winning again. There's been a real return to the gung-ho, pro-technology, US of A, yee-hi sci-fi.